Today is Tuesday, April 2nd, 2015. Today we have Tom Drake, who's kind of the father of whistleblowers here, and probably the inspiration for Edward Snowden as well. Tom Drake is a former senior executive at the National Security Agency, where he blew the whistle on massive multi-billion-dollar fraud, waste, and widespread violations of the rights of citizens through secret mass surveillance programs after 9/11. Interestingly enough, I think his first day of employment at the NSA was 9/11. As a retaliation and reprisal, the Obama administration indicted Drake in 2010 as the first whistleblower since Daniel Ellsberg to be charged with espionage. Drake faced 35 years in prison, turning him into the enemy of the state for his oath to defend the Constitution. In 2011, the government's case against him collapsed, and he went free in a plea deal. He pleaded to one count of a misdemeanor. He is the recipient of the 2011 Rittenhour Truth-Telling Prize. Welcome to our show, Mr. Drake.
Yeah, thanks for having me.
Well, thank you for being here. It's a real honor. The first inspiration for having you on the show was to have you comment on this whole breaking story of that, where the Intercept reported that American and British spies had hacked into the internal computer network of the largest manufacturer of SIM cards, stealing encryption keys used to protect the privacy of cell phone communications. So before we get on to some of the bigger and more global issues, I was wondering if you had any comment on that hack that was perpetuated by this joint unit consisting of operatives from the NSA and its British counterpart, the Government Communication Headquarters, or the GCHQ.
No surprise at all. Look, hundreds of millions of people use cell phones, and SIM cards have what's called over-the-air updates from the provider, the cell service provider, and having those keys as well as other related information essentially gives you the keys to the kingdom on an extraordinary percentage of people who use cell phones that use SIM cards, which is most of the world. I mean, you got two primary systems, the CDMA and GSM, and so I don't think people still fully appreciate that particular heist. It just shows you how far the surveillance regime is willing to go to compromise people on an extraordinarily vast scale. This has gone far beyond targeting real threats, which do exist. This is just mass surveillance, and any of those keys, the manufacturer, of course, has downplayed it because in some ways extraordinarily embarrassing, but also be a severe impact, on their profit model. But they are the world's largest manufacturer. They have many facilities across the world that make these cards, and the cards is what gives the phone its life in terms of, hey, here I am, this is the number, this is how you reach me. The over-the-air part, though, allows surreptitious updates, and it's assumed that the provider that's doing the over-the-air updates, some people, it's like momentary. You'll see the update come across. You have an update from a carrier, and you just say, okay. Well, if it's being done by somebody else or being done under the guise of, then they essentially own your phone. So unless you're using other forms of encryption, if you're using other forms of communication, when you're actually using the cell phone network, you're compromised.
And that's true because cell phones don't authenticate the towers, but towers authenticate the phones, correct?
Yeah, I mean, it's a one-way authentication. It's assumed it's the trust model. The trust model is one way. I don't have a way of confirming. That's like Stingray system devices, which is very shadowy world in terms of the FBI and other government entities, basically fake cell towers. But the phone doesn't know it. The phone just says, "Oh, hi, here I am." And the tower is just always querying. So any cell phone that's within the footprint of that tower is going to get picked up and identified.
Does possessing the key...
You have to have specialized phones, black phones, and other things to even mask some of that. But the fact is, to even communicate, I mean, that's like it's like your mailbox. I mean, in some ways, I mean, I try to keep all this really simple because a lot of this is like hidden and virtual, and it's not like some nuclear cloud, mushroom cloud showing up in your backyard, right? It's not one of those obvious things, but it's like having your mailbox, out on the street or in your neighborhood. That's where you go to get your mail. So they know where your mail is. They know where the box is. But here, it's like it's always open. It doesn't matter. No matter what mail goes in there, we know what it is.
So that's an excellent point, Tom. Possessing these keys not only sidesteps the need to get a warrant or a wiretap, but it also leaves no trace on the wireless provider's network that the communications were intercepted. Does the bulk key theft additionally enable intelligence agencies to unlock any previously encrypted communications that they had already intercepted but did not yet have the ability to decrypt?
That depends. I mean, it depends on the encryption. It depends on how well it's protected. Remember, the SIM card is to communicate through the cellular network, and primarily, obviously, through the tower. But you have firmware updates, the firmware updates that are possible on the card itself would potentially allow, or actually allow, other access. So it's any communication that's occurring, and of course I get to monitor it. So unless I'm protecting that particular form of communication via other means, and the other means would be various forms of encryption, and even then I'm going to know what the metadata is associated with that communication. You're inside the stream. I mean, this is. I just remember, why do I rob banks? Because that's where the money is. I mean, this is the key identifier for modern technology in terms of what most people obviously carry around. Not everybody. We keep forgetting not everybody has a cell phone, but this makes it much easier. In fact, it really. In some ways, the surveillance regimes of the world at this level, I mean, it's extraordinary. It means those keys, even when they're not used, they're all serialized effectively. They're all uniquely identified, obviously, because every phone is unique. So that SIM card is a one-off, even in the millions, but it's a one-off. Everyone is identifiable. So no matter where it shows up, guess what?
Yep. So to give our listeners just a scope of this problem, the manufacturer is a multinational firm out of the Netherlands. I think the name of the firm is Gemalto. The chips that we're talking about that are used in cell phones and also the next generation credit cards. We didn't even talk about that part.
Well, there's a whole lot of you're touching on something. People sort of, news comes and goes. You get your 1 minute, not 15 minute or even 5 minute. Maybe you get your 1 minute highlight, and there are all kinds of other SIM cards. The SIM cards, when we talk about cards, go far beyond just phones. People also forget there's a whole lot of other devices, including modems, including built into computers, or the little cards you plug into the side, or your tablets. Many of those can be used for communication across cellular or equivalent networks.
Right.
All those require keys.
So what do we do now? I mean, if you were Gemalto, where would you go? I mean, how would you defeat this?
I personally would have. I would have basically. I would have canceled all those keys. That's what I would have done. I would have gone fully public. I would have sucked it up and just said, sorry, all of these keys. We believe that this is the range of keys that were compromised, and they would have just published the list and would have put the alert out: do not use these keys.
And
they didn't.
What did they do?
They basically did a PR response. It wasn't as bad. Blah blah blah. Our systems were this is all going on without their knowledge. Okay.
Yeah.
I understand if you're a major corporation that you're not going to fess up to that your security was compromised.
Do you think they have a criminal case?
I actually believe they do. Okay, I believe they do in terms of their subscribers. I really do. But it's up to them whether or not they want to pursue it. It was clear from other than the sort of the shock at first, and they weren't really responding to it, almost like first sort of the forms of denial, and then recognizing, oh yeah, maybe we were, but it was not as bad as you think it is.
Right.
We're talking hundreds of millions of keys. I mean, this is, and obviously that's their bread and butter. So they're attempting to reduce the public alarm, and yet this means, and it's like, well, I don't know. They just sort of shrugged their shoulders and said, move on. These aren't the keys you're looking for. I mean,
well, that's why we need you speaking out on shows like this and all the other forums that you speak out on. And we're going to make sure this word gets out again.
I don't know. Maybe it doesn't matter. I mean, I can play devil's advocate with myself or with your audience. It's like, I continue to hear this refrain, and I realize, I was on the receiving end of a pretty egregious criminal investigation. Ultimately, was indicted, facing 35 years in prison. Let's just say I get really kind of focused on what matters in life, given what I and others have personally lived through. But I realize we're a minority, although we're also examples. And these examples, these are sort of, we become object lessons. But look, if privacy doesn't matter, if people continue to say, well, hey, I've got nothing to fear because I have nothing to hide, or I don't care if the government's inside my communications, and yet when I challenge people in public, I speak in a lot of different fora, and when I challenge them, as I did just recently, even with high school students, they all say, when you actually press them and say, okay, you say you have nothing to hide, then just turn over your life to me, and I'll put it in a lockbox for safekeeping. And in that lockbox is all your passwords and all your keys and all your SIM cards and all your medical records and all your accounts. And when I say, well, would you do it? And then you're consenting to this. This is not unconsenting like what we just discussed. This is consenting, and they shake their head no. And I say, why not? Because that's me. I said, well, now we're at the fundamental question. Your sovereignty, right? And you're saying to me you're not willing. Well, so if you're not willing to turn over your life to me as a consenting human being, then why would you let the government do this in secret, or any other entity for that matter?
Right.
And then it's like, oh, I never really quite thought about it like that. That somehow you can trust the government or trust those that represent us or don't represent us in many cases. Well, then that's where the conversation really begins, and it can be a very difficult conversation because it's like, oh, I might have to do something about this. Maybe I do have to protect me. Maybe I do have to at least do some kind of form of due diligence.
Right. Tom,
sure.
Bill Binney has made the point that this mega data collection just isn't an invasion of privacy. It just isn't mega data collection, but that it can be used for what he calls parallel construction or planned perjury programs. In other words, what do you think?
Yeah, planned perjury. The parallel construction is this weird legal term. It's basically repurposing. You're using it under the guise of, right? So, if I have access to information and data, evidence, right, and then I repurpose it, well, that's parallel construction, and that's been going on now for quite some time. So this has been their argument. It's an argument in a debate I no doubt will be having with Stuart Baker out at Lewis and Clark. It probably will come up in terms of what does it mean to have an identity in the modern world, right? What does identity mean, and what are the threats to identity, or does it matter?
Yeah. So
parallel construction is I just repurpose. I collect intelligence. Right, I collect information for intelligence purposes, ostensibly, national security reasons, national security justifications, national security authorities. But, while I've got this stuff, let's see what else I could do with it.
Can you be set up for a crime?
Oh, yeah, easily. Set up for a crime, that's precisely what they did with me. They didn't actually have the evidence. They manufactured it or reframed what they had to make it look like, for their purposes, a crime had been committed. I mean, this harkens back okay, on a much vaster scale, just because of the sheer amount of data. It harkens back to the days of the FBI and and setting up people.
Right.
So I realize there are real crimes. I mean, there are, and crimes against society, crimes against each other, crimes against mankind, all kinds of crimes, right? But here, when the temptations, and history is not kind, that we're going to use this information against you.
Yeah. Is that?
And it doesn't matter. See, here's the thing. And I get this response, well, geez, if they did this to you, they could do it to me. Yes, that's exactly the point. It's the ability to do that. How do you protect yourself against a secret government or a secret or a corporation who's using information against you? Usually, with a corporate side, even though terms and conditions are a check mark, at least you're consenting, quote unquote. In something like a secrecy regime, a security regime, you're not. I mean, it really raises extraordinarily troubling questions. And remember, this is why I've been I will not relent on this in terms of, well, if the Constitution doesn't matter, if the amendments to the Constitution don't matter, especially the First and Fourth Amendment don't matter, due process doesn't matter, because actually parallel construction is a violation of due process. I'm supposed to, I need to know the accusers. I need to face my accusers, and you need to present to me in a court of law, third branch of government, what it is that you say I did.
Right.
I don't have that option. And if you're reframing it, I don't even know what the basis for your charge is, because you're hiding it, because that's national security, that's secret, that's executive privilege, state secrets privilege. You don't have the right to see it. Oh, but you have the right to use it for whatever purposes you want. Oh, but really, if you're a good person, good citizen, then perfect citizen, you don't have to worry about it. Really? How do I know?
Right.
If you say there's nothing to hide, then why are you hiding this from the citizenry? If you say that all this is necessary for public safety, if you say this is all necessary to protect the nation, why are you operating in such extraordinarily deep secrecy with respect to these programs? Or why, after the exposure start happening,
right,
then you turn around and then go to extraordinary lengths, like the U.S. government did, to pass Enabling Act legislation that makes quote-unquote legal, or at least provides legal cover for the things in which were illegal.
Right. How, just for our audience, and just for a short history lesson here, how and why did the government's case against you collapse?
In the end, they are unable to prevail with their primary charges, and the primary charges were this egregious use of the 1917 World War I era Espionage Act. I mean, they had turned me into a spy, and the spy equivalent. And the judge, the tribunal, this is all pretrial proceedings right up until the eve of the scheduled public trial, effectively collapsed. And there was just a very small window. That small window was the Thursday prior to the scheduled public trial. That was Monday. That was going to be in June of 2011. I was able, on my terms, to negotiate a plea deal, in which they dropped all of the felony counts, all 10 of them, and I pled out to a minor misdemeanor for exceeding authorized use of computer, which I had already acknowledged them a long time ago, but that was part of my whistleblowing.
Right. Well, let's talk about whistleblowing in general. I had developed some questions with a couple of friends, and I think it's important to get a guy like you on the record because what you have to say is important. So I sent you some of these questions earlier. What else would you say about whistleblowing and whistleblowers that hasn't yet been said in documentaries like Citizen4, interviews, articles, and books? What have we missed about whistleblowers and whistleblowing in general?
Most people have a very uncomfortable, I have to say this, I mean, I've got to acknowledge that people are not many people, I'll just say many people are not comfortable with those who blow the whistle, because it's essentially holding up the mirror to ourselves. Whether it's inside a corporation, whether it's inside government, or Daniel Ellsberg is considered the modern really father of whistleblowers, the Pentagon Papers fame, an era in which I grew up as a very young adult, young teenager, seeing that all unfold during the 1970s. It makes us really uncomfortable. It makes us confront hard truths. And in the case of Ellsberg, it was the bright and shining lie of Vietnam. So much had been invested by this country and all the sacrifice that people had a really hard time believing would the government go that far, would the government actually lie that much about its foreign policy. Well, the fact is it did. In some cases, that was just the beginning. But with all the social upheaval and all the protests and everything else during that period, an extraordinary period in our own history, it was uncomfortable to confront those truths. We now recognize Ellsberg as extraordinarily courageous, extraordinarily brave. He himself faced 115 years in prison. In fact, he actually went to trial, of course, and he got tossed because of prosecutorial misconduct. So whistleblowers but also in terms of history, are crucial. And I'm going to just give you one example, just one example from before the United States became the United States, and yet was no doubt one of the key triggers in the colony saying enough is enough. And that, guess who I consider to be the very first whistleblower was Benjamin in U.S. history. Was Benjamin Franklin, and he was the assistant postmaster general. He was living in London at the time, and let's just say because he's assistant postmaster general, it was brought to his attention. I'm smiling. Brought to his attention a piece of mail that had gone to the governor of Massachusetts, and guess what? That it had come from the Crown, and Crown is basically saying, "Oh yeah, we have all these rights here, in the Crown, but those colonists, they don't have the same rights." He made it public anonymously in the British press, and it caused a huge stink. Months and months and months went by. Who is this? Who could have done this? Who leaked it? Right? Leaked it. How could this have happened? And they were just going up and down trying to figure out the source. It was anonymous, right?
Wow.
It finally came out that it was Benjamin Franklin. He was put on trial in London. You read up on it. It's an extraordinary period in U.S. history as to how far the British Crown went to put Franklin in the dungeon. And the defense of Franklin is extraordinary, including his own words. So it's extraordinary history, and yet this was another one of these events. Remember, informing the public about how the overlords really looked at us across the ocean. Look, if there hadn't been an American Revolution, right, then we wouldn't have had a United States of America. And it was a violent revolution. And I can make a very powerful argument that if it wasn't for all the egregious violations of quote unquote the rights of the colonists, right, the supposed rights they had, but they didn't really have because they're colonists, well, that was the basis for the First and Fourth Amendment. And if you don't have and the other amendments in terms of due process and the right to trial and all of that, if I don't have a First and Fourth Amendment, I don't have an America. And if I don't have an America, then we're not Americans. And if we're not Americans, then what's the difference?
I think that's exactly the point that Harvard Law professor Lawrence Lessig made in his interview with Edward Snowden. It was exactly that. Marching on here.
Sure.
So that was Ben Franklin, and here in our day and age, what medium would you use to go about whistleblowing, saying what you have to say, and how would you promote those ideas? What's the best way to be a whistleblower?
Best way is it's fraught with peril. I'm the first to acknowledge that, especially in the post 9/11 world. I mean, look how far they went to destroy my life as well as others. I was at one point was actually threatened with spending the rest of my life in prison if I didn't cooperate with their criminal investigation. I mean, This is how far they went to protect state secrets. They knew they were in violation of the Constitution, but they didn't want the people to know. And so anybody that dared hold up a mirror, that's the whistleblower. I mean, remember, it's you see something that's wrong. You see something that's a threat to public safety or health. You see fraud, waste, or abuse. In this case, I'm seeing an extraordinary, secret unchaining from the Constitution, a silent coup, as I've said. And we were under emergency decree, and the government was just going to go as far as it could with those powers. I mean, people keep forgetting our own history, even with what happened after 9/11. Bush signed a secret presidential directive on the 4th of October. It still has not been made public, effectively saying, you know what, NSA, you've got permission to mass surveil the country in the interest of national security. It doesn't matter that it's violating the Constitution. Of course, he didn't say that. They don't ever say that this gives you the permission to violate the law. They don't say it that way. But that's actually what happened. And I guess it doesn't matter. I mean, if the government needs to violate the Constitution and the rights of the citizenry, remember, the United States became the petri dish for mass surveillance. Then it was exported overseas. It's not the other way around.
Right.
On the other hand, the regimes that were in place, right, in terms of surveillance, I used to be part of that system, but it was always targeted. We didn't go in and just mass surveil countries. Even with the technology we had back in the 80s and the 80s when I was in the system, as it were. Here, I just think, because people forget this, and I go back to 9/11 because it's such a critical event, sort of before 9/11 and after 9/11. I say this in a silence documentary that's been making the rounds and should be made more widely available in terms of video on demand here in the next few months. Myself, Justin Radak, and John Kiriakou, the CIA whistleblower with respect to the torture program. 9/11 was a failure of the government under the Constitution to provide for the common defense. It had failed to keep people out of harm's way. 3,000 people are murdered on 9/11. But that's not how those at the top took it. They just didn't. They gave them license to unleash themselves in secret, and Cheney flagged this. Cheney, obviously, I mean, Rahm Emanuel said it really, really, really well some years later. You never let a good crisis go to waste. So 5 days after 9/11, he says, we're going to go to the dark side. I don't think people fully appreciated what Cheney was really saying when he said that.
Yeah.
And so you're a whistleblower. Look, I'm confronting, and I'm hearkening back to the echoes of the Nixon administration. No president's above the law. Just because the president says it's legal doesn't make it so, right? The echoes were just screaming in my ear when I'm finding out in the days and weeks after 9/11, the NSA now had the quote-unquote authorization, what Michael V. Hayden himself said recently in a quote-unquote debate with Judge Napolitano, that this program, right, it was always called the program, right, the program was simply raw executive authority. Raw executive authority. That's an alien form of government. That's not a government. I took an oath to support and defend against all enemies, foreign and domestic. I'm now confronting that the direct threat is my own government.
Right.
But 9/11 was the excuse that gave them to say, hey, who cares about all that stuff?
Right.
So you're a whistleblower. What do? I mean, say, before you become a whistleblower, I'm confronted by the stark reality that my own government is an abject violation of the Constitution in secret. And it's being covered up in secret. What do? I'm not the one that gave the orders. I'm not the one that was part of the program. I'm not the one that authorized it. I'm not the president or the vice president, and I'm not General Michael V. Hayden. What do? I decided I was going to say something.
So you're right about all of this. It's a bitch. So
most people don't. Look, Ellsberg has said this. I've talked extensively to Ellsberg and other whistleblowers.
Right.
Most people see it, may notice it, but say, hey, I'm not going to say nothing to nobody.
Right. So here's my
because it affects my life. Look, yes, people, it's Abraham's Maslow hierarchy of needs, right? look, I've got a job, I got a house, I've got bills to pay.
Right.
Why would I jeopardize my entire life to expose wrongdoing that someone else committed?
Right. Russ Tice told us on this show he was looking for work. He's been blackballed. So here's the thing, Tom. What are the critical things that are missing in building support for whistleblowers, both within the national intelligence community and with the public? What's missing? How do you build that support for whistleblowers?
Well, I say build it. You're almost asking if there is no support. As a result of a lot of this, all right, there is much more support than there ever was in the past. Okay, is it sufficient? I mean, part of this is how do you ensure that a whistleblower is even able to live after they blow the whistle, or in the case of like John Kiriakou, he actually ultimately ended up in prison. He was facing many more years. He ended up in a plea deal. He's got small children, so. But he's, as I still do, has extraordinary legal bills and is in severe debt. So it's the support networks. It's organizations that and there are coalitions that do exist. Is it as good as it should be? No. Like I said, there's sort of this love-hate relationship. We celebrate like the remember the famous, it's a famous movie, Brockovich. Remember when she exposed in California?
Right.
The chemicals that were leaking into the water supply?
The chromium, right.
Okay. Well, she was a whistleblower, okay? We celebrate it. It became big news. She herself still talks about it. She herself is still asked to come and speak. But when it comes to even national security or even larger issues, right? Larger issues that have a much greater impact that are not, but it's not as visible to people. It's because it's sort of not in my backyard, it's not in my neighborhood. I can't see it, so I can't touch it. I can't feel it. I can't smell it. Then it's someone else's problem.
And is the best way to be a whistleblower to use an interlocutor like the National Whistleblower Center or WikiLeaks or Expose Facts?
It depends. I mean, in this arena, it's extremely dangerous. It still is to take on the powers that be, the elite, the establishment, the highest levels of the status quo. Remember, this kind of power doesn't like it when you hold up a mirror to itself. It does not, especially if you were once part of the system. How dare you expose us? And the genuflecting response is, we're going to punish you and punish you good. I tell people, and this is where there are coalitions emerging, but you've got to have proper legal representation, right? You've got to have a trusted lawyers that can represent you. On the other hand, I attempted that, like some of the best attorney law firms in the country, and there was individual attorneys that would represent me because I was facing, we're talking 1 to 3 million, right? Mm-hmm. And they said, nope, I can't because my firm says they're going to represent me pro bono. And these are large law firms that have pro bono practices. They said, you'll have to leave the firm to represent Mr. Drake. And then it's like, why? Well, we have a government and contractor clients be a conflict of interest.
Right.
So
look. It's easy to go after people that aren't connected. It's easy. I mean, the hypocrisy is extraordinary. Look what happened to Petraeus. Look what happened. Look at Brennan. Look at Panetta. Okay. Look at people like Alexander, the former head of NSA. They can go out and talk all kinds of stuff. They can even sell secrets for profit. Right. What I knew from the inside, I'm going to come out and I'm going to repackage it and sell it for a really pretty price. They're not quote unquote finding themselves on the receiving end of a 10 felony count indictment with many, many decades in prison. Why? Because they're connected. Power protects itself, okay?
That's a good point.
So when power, the irresponsible side of power, is exercising itself for its own ends, look, there's going to be people that get caught up in it, and, how dare you? As one person told me, you threw a monkey wrench into the system, right? And you were jeopardizing the profit streams of a lot of people. They had to punish you. It's as simple as that, Tom. Pure economics.
So, how did you see the ethical dilemmas related to your whistleblowing?
There was no ethical dilemma because I took an oath to support and defend the Constitution.
All right.
It's that simple. Look, that is the only thing that was. You say, what? That's the only. That was the primacy of that oath took precedence over everything else. There was no oath to the president. There was no oath to secrecy. There was no oath to cover up. There was no oath to using your position, right? Abusing the power for other ends. And the kicker for me, I live with an extraordinarily deep burden. It's the what-ifs of history. Because part of all this, it wasn't just blowing the whistle on government wrongdoing and violations of the Constitution, Fourth Amendment in particular. It was the fact that we had the very best of American ingenuity and innovation well before 9/11. We knew about the big data problem. We had solved that problem. And NSA, in its myopic cultural blindness, said, no, we're not going that way. We're not. We could have prevented 9/11. I know that as a fact, okay? And that was part of the more egregious cover-ups, things I gave the two 9/11 congressional investigations. That testimony, both oral and written, was apparently so secret that NSA would not allow it even in the secret report. And even to this day, people cannot find any record of that testimony. All they have been able to discover after, we're talking now 13 years, okay? The only thing they can find is I was interviewed. No other record.
So, how would you, for young professionals at Langley and Quantico, how would you help them believe in the importance of speaking truth to power, and if that gets them nowhere, speaking truth publicly?
Yeah, well, that's the third rail. That's ultimately what I did do. I touched the third rail, which is the First Amendment. I actually exercised the going to the press, right, and holding up the mirror and letting the press, as the Fourth Estate, say what was so, right? That's what I did in the end. As did Ellsberg. Remember, Ellsberg went through many, many channels. People don't realize this, for over many years. In fact, he wishes he'd gone to the press sooner, not later, but everybody remained silent. He went through his chain of command that existed at that time at the highest levels, both in the Pentagon as well as to key people in Congress, and everybody just looked the other way. They would not say one word. They would not speak out. And he was part of the system. He was actually part of that study, the history of Vietnam. He was part of that. So what do you say, right? Well, you say it's the moral hazard, right? You are entering into a secret world. You take an oath to support and defend the Constitution. If you want to subvert the oath, then ultimately history is not going to be very kind.
Right.
That's what it comes down to. The problem is, when you're in those type of organizations, I've been in both the NSA and the CIA. I was in the DIA when I was an intel officer in the Navy. There is extraordinary pressure to use secrecy to hide things you're doing. We have too much history here to show that, right? I will use secrecy to hide things we're doing. And this is precisely what happened, is that I'm using national security as remember, the means to an end. So the whole thing of national security, right, becomes my justification to do all manner of things. Well, hey, if I can get away with it, it's sort of the Colonel Cathcart defense in Catch-22, the famous, parody satire. Who's going to stop us now? We have all this power. Who's going to stop us now? Well, I don't know. Power does tend to corrupt. I have to agree with Lord Acton. I mean, in absolute power corrupts absolutely. So imagine having extraordinary amounts of secret power. Now imagine taking that. We've been here in the history. We had the Red Scares of the 50s. We had COINTELPRO. We had Operation Chaos CIA. We had Operation Minaret and Shamrock at NSA. These were direct violations of the Constitution and the rights of people who lived in America. And they were getting away with it for years. Operation Shamrock was a multi-decade mass surveillance program, and pretty much all telegrams being turned over NSA from the end of World War II to 1975 before that program was revealed.
Wow.
We've been there before, except now it's on a far vaster scale. And that's where I fear for the Republic. Is it? I mean, we're eating our own ethical, moral, and constitutional seed corn right out from under us. It's somehow, I've had people tell me, look me right in the face and say, Tom, the Constitution isn't a suicide pact. And I just look right back at it and I say, oh, so that because that gives you license then to just do anything? Really?
So here I am, a young agent training at Langley or Quantico, and I want to do the right thing, but I want confidence to be able to do the right thing, to become a whistleblower if that's necessary. But there's nothing institutionally that would support that, even for the most egregious violations. That's in the national security community. Now, just listen. Bear with me for a second, Tom.
Sure.
In the military, there was the helicopter pilot, the killer helicopter pilot Hugh Thompson Jr. at the My Lai massacre, who intervened and even told the troops on the ground, Lieutenant Calley's troops, the company C there, 1st Battalion, 20th Infantry Regiment, that he would train his twin caliber machine guns on them if they didn't stop killing civilians. And for years, he was hounded. He was called a traitor, particularly after he testified. He suffered from PTSD, alcoholism, divorce, you name it. Finally, the military got a clue. He was awarded the Soldier's Medal. He was awarded the Peace Abbey Conscience Medal Award. But then the military had him come before West Point, the U.S. Naval Academy at Annapolis, the U.S. Air Force Academy in Colorado Springs, the Marine Corps Officers Training Program in Quantico, and he spoke to the issue of professional ethics. So I think the military is a step ahead of the national security agencies and intelligence agencies when it comes to professional responsibility and ethics. Do you agree?
Yeah, except the Bergdahl incident might just be a little. Let's just pause for a moment in terms of, or the whole thing with Petraeus and all the generals and the extraordinary follies of our foreign policy expressed in the form of military might and power. You're right, because I used to be in the military. I was for many years enlisted and as an officer, and there's the military code, the Code of Military Justice, the Uniform Code.
Right.
There is something called Article 92. People also forget this. Article 92 is the whole thing about lawful orders. It's not just any order you follow, it's lawful orders. And you have an obligation, you have an ethical responsibility to question any order you are concerned about regarding its lawfulness.
And you're trained
it's not unlawful to question an order.
And you're trained in what's lawful.
Yes, you have to, because it's the military. I mean, you were asked, as I was over a number of years, if necessary, asked to give the ultimate sacrifice for the sake of your country. Okay, that's not a small thing. And why was Article 92? Okay, why is that so critical in the military? I actually go back to post-World War II during the Nuremberg trials, and I've spoken to actual trial attorneys and staff that were there. German High Command used the excuse, the defense, this was the excuse, I was just following orders. You can't hold that against me, even though we quote-unquote lost the war. That was not considered a valid defense when there was actions that they took that were clearly crimes against humanity on an extraordinary scale. So just following orders was an insufficient defense, that you still had moral agency, and this is the phrase, this moral agency. What, just give up your ability to think, critically think, as a moral agent regarding what is and isn't right in terms of treatment and actions
Exactly.
of yourselves and others? Well, that was on display during the Nuremberg trials. But apparently, we now live under a system called American exceptionalism, which apparently grants historical immunity to any action we decide is in the national interest. Again, ends justifies the means. So even if the means are in violation, right, it's because we get away with it because we have this exceptionalism clause that allows us to do so. That is moral bankruptcy of the system to say that. We're not immune from history at all. We're no more an exception to history than any other empire that's come and gone.
So again, I'm a young agent sitting at Langley or Quantico in a trading program, and I'm wrestling with this whole issue of Tom Drake and Edward Snowden and doing the right thing. How can I be supported by my employer? Do you think that these young agents need a curriculum that's focused on professional ethics and responsibility, just like there is in the military with regard to what's a lawful order?
I'm trying not to be too cynical, okay? People talk about reform. I believe they're beyond reform. They really are. I mean, I'm not going to mince words at all. I'm really not. Okay? I use every system that existed on paper. I went to the classes. We had ethics classes. We had called a hotline, which is the whistleblower hotline. They had all of this, right? And yet when I used the system to blow the whistle on an institution that was in abject violation of the law, engaged in multi-billion-dollar fraud of American taxpayers' money, and is covering up critical intelligence that it knew it had, didn't share with mass command authorities, or had kept covered or buried or didn't know it had, although it had collected it, regarding 9/11, pre- and post-9/11 intelligence, and then I'm exposed, and they hounded me for years and went through all kinds of retaliation for many, many years, well before I ever considered going to the press, mind you. Well, then where's the betrayal? The system itself was set up to simply, a troublemaker. They're calling the hotline. That's a troublemaker. Watch out for them. That means the system has corrupted itself. Right. So where are you left? In terms of my moral agency, I then went outside of NSA, meaning outside of NSA within the government, to go to the overseers, the oversight committees, and others to tell them what was going on inside NSA. NSA didn't like that. They actually said, they warned me. I was pulled aside by my immediate supervisor, the number 3 person at NSA, the head of the Signals Intelligence Directorate, was warned in no uncertain terms, be careful. They're looking for leakers. Not leakers to the press, leakers to congressional investigators.
Right. And that's...
Okay, no, wait a minute.
Okay.
So now you have the secrecy system protecting itself from even those who are bound to ensure that the secrecy system remains within the bounds of the law and statute and regulation. That there is a higher obligation because it is secret. Remember, there's this tension between transparent, open government, right, and those things that you do need to keep secret. And yet, when you're using that to hide, using it as cover, using it to engage in all manner of activity, and you know that it's wrong, but you can use your own system to protect yourself from exposure. Well, if you're in the system and you expose it, guess what? You're in trouble.
So I don't.
Most people don't. Most people don't. Look, I've had many people have tell me, why didn't your other colleagues who knew about this? Well, several did. The Bill Binnies, the Kirk Weebies, the Ed Loomises, Diane Rourke, who had the NSA account. People still don't appreciate how far we went. Absolute silence met us at every turn, and all the information we gave them was buried and covered up. Even investigators I spoke with, extraordinary frustration, being turned aside. It didn't do any difference. It made no difference. It wasn't until we actually went, ultimately, I did, right? I made the critical, life-changing choice, knowing what was happening, right? To go to the press with what I knew in early 2006, knowing that if I did so, that I was probably going to end up ending my career for good.
So what's the answer, Tom? Is Congress the answer? And I don't think so, because we heard Elizabeth Murray tell us last week that when John Brennan announced the restructuring of the CIA, he told Congress post facto, this is what I'm doing. Live with it. He didn't ask their permission at the House and Senate Intelligence Commissions. He didn't ask their for their input, and they do the same.
Not.
And they do the same thing with their budget. You're going to give me $14-15 billion. That's it. And which brings us to HR 1466.
Okay.
Okay. So this is a bill, as you know, to completely repeal the Patriot Act and to dismantle the NSA surveillance state.
Yeah.
Are you for it? Just
yes.
Dismantle it and then rebuild something else?
Yes.
All right. How do we get that passed? How do we get that support? Looks like we have
that's your challenge. So here, this is a great opportunity, perfect segue, and this is me as whistleblower essentially saying, society, people, citizenry, I'm going to hold up the mirror. If this matters enough, if what it means to be an American, a citizen period, a human with moral agency, does this matter enough? Then it comes back to that extraordinary phrase at the very beginning of the preamble of the Constitution, we the people, in order to form a more perfect union. If that matters, then we'll take action. If it doesn't, then you deserve the government you get. It's that simple. And don't come back later and start complaining about it. And don't come back and say, oh, geez, I wish we'd listened to you, whistleblower. Look, we're the canaries here. This is more the end of the line. This is not at the beginning of the exposure. This is the end of it. We're essentially the Paul Revere's, to use another historical warning example. What if Paul Revere hadn't gotten on his horse, all right? Although there's some myths around that, right? If he hadn't gotten on his horse and rode into the night, what if he hadn't done that?
Yeah.
Well, that's informing the public. Look, as I remember, this is extremely personal for me, but what's at stake here is far more than just, because I see the shades, right, coming down. And I'm telling people, do you really want the shades coming down on society, right? And I'm not trying to be overly dramatic. It's just people that in positions of power can't get enough. They're going to keep pushing it and pushing it. Essentially what's happening in this country is they're colonializing the country, okay? These are extremely strong words. People don't like talking about this. They really don't.
Go on. Make them understand.
Well, because it's people... History's not kind. People like having power over others, and the people that are usually, unfortunately, in terms of the human condition, people who get positions of power over others really get to enjoy it, right? It's pathological. Most human beings cannot resist the temptation or the urges to abuse the very power in which is vested in them, including the President of the United States. Okay? It's too tempting. So what's the final check? If all other checks fail, internal checks in terms of the executive branch, legislation which is actually enabling, not disabling, right? That's why I'm so in support. I just want to get back to a 9-10. I'd be happy with a 9-10 America right now, because we had everything we needed before 9/11 to stop 9/11, but we didn't. So at least get back, but at least begin to roll it back. If that check doesn't work, and they're complicit and compliant and part of the military intelligence congressional cybersecurity complex, or what Bill Binney calls, the happiness management, right? Okay, that's what it is. It's happiness management. Keep everybody happy. Keep all the jobs. Hey, what are you worried about, right? This is a growth industry. Get with the program, right? That's the whole. And get with the program. Don't question it. If that fails, although I'm increasingly hopeful about some parts of the judicial branch, right? Like my own judge. Go back and read the July 15th, 2011 transcripts from my pro forma sentencing, right? The judge had extraordinary words. He went back to the original basis for this country as to holding the government, the executive branch, to account, right? We don't do this to Americans. That's why we had a revolution. It's extraordinary words. I just wish more judges would say this. Well, what if then? Where do you go? You go to the press. The press is supposed to be there as a final check. They're the ones that are supposed to inform the citizenry, the consent of the governed. You can't consent to something you don't know about, right? Or it's being done in your name without your permission. Well, you go to the press, right? Well, most of the press are parrots. Most of the press are stenographers of the government. Most of the press, mainstream media, right? Although there are exceptions, of course. Well, if they're not failing, then you go to like alternative press, right? And all of this is local, regional, ultimately national and global. If it matters, you'll take action. If it doesn't matter to people, if the heart of your life in terms of what's necessary to those inalienable rights in the Declaration of Independence, life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness, amongst a number of inalienable rights that we have as human beings, then if that doesn't matter, then don't be surprised when people come along in the guise of, in the name of, we're more than willing to erode your rights because they have to. They can't have power without taking something away from other people.
It's pathological, as you say. It's almost addictive. I've seen it.
Yes, it's extraordinarily addictive. Look, when I confronted NSA's senior counsel, the very attorney who told Hayden, yep, it's legal, the program, which was known as Stellar Wind at NSA. It was a mass surveillance regime. Still not fully revealed in spite of all the Snowden disclosures. I keep saying this to people, and most people still don't listen. I mean, in spite of the Snowden disclosures, there's still more stuff. Yes, there is. People don't yet fully appreciate how far U.S. electronic society has been penetrated by the United States government in secret, in cooperation with all kinds of telcos and service providers, still to this day, okay? So I confront that general counsel, right? I confront him. I said, what are we doing violating the Constitution? He said, you don't understand, Mr. Drake. And these were the most chilling of words I have heard, that I heard right after 9/11. He says, everything is different now. Quote, we live in exigent conditions. Extraordinary means are necessary to deal with the threat. And I looked at him, I said, including violating the Fourth Amendment of the Constitution? He says, well, hey, we just need the data. You don't understand. We just need the data. We don't know where the threats are. So you're willing to violate the Fourth Amendment to do so. And then I looked at him, I said, wait a minute. You're in violation of the very act, the Foreign Intelligence Surveillance Act, which is Fourth Amendment's probable cause standard, right, to quote-unquote violate the rights of a U.S. person. And if that law is insufficient to meet the needs of national security, based on what happened on 9/11, then go back to Congress. That's the mechanism that you go to change law. We have a mechanism. Law is not static. And he looked at it and he said, if we do that, they'll say no. They say no. So you're making up law yourself.
Yeah.
That's why I said the government in secret staged a silent coup against the Constitution. It unchained itself and gave itself license under the fiat of national security to do whatever it felt it needed to do. And that is literally militarizing this entire space. I'm the commander-in-chief. The world is the battlefield. Get used to it.
And we've had guests on the program who have argued that these privacy violations and mega data collections and on and on and on and on are really not for the purpose of preventing terrorism. It's not counterterrorism. They hand this stuff over to law enforcement, and we're going in the direction of a police state.
Precisely. And so, as Bill Binney has said and others have said, I've said it in various ways, it's the equivalent of virtual turnkey tyranny behind the scenes. Winston is cowering in a corner. Why? Because it was the only place in that novel that he could go where the surveillance cameras couldn't see him, which meant they knew where he was. And remember, Winston himself in the end gave in. He did not in the end, he gave up resisting. He just went with the program. People forget that in '84, okay?
Right. So
do we really want to live there? But people, Tom, geez, I get to get up in the morning and walk to work. I go take my car. I get to go buy my favorite beverages. What are you talking about, Tom? Just read the history of East Germany, a country in which I became an expert. They realized several decades after their police state regime, you can't keep pounding up on people. You got to be a little bit more subtle. They went to a psychological program. You don't have to take out everybody. Just make a few examples of people.
Yeah.
And that just keeps people, they'll realize, hey, you want your supper, you want your job, you want all this, don't cause any waves. But that's not the America that I know. I didn't grow up in Texas and Vermont simply to pay obeisance to some artificial authority who's taken away my rights, who is threatening to take away my rights, or say, hey, I'm going to make you feel safe again.
All right, so
that's not the America I grew up in.
Absolutely. So I want our audience to know from you, the expert, how bad it is, how bad this slide towards a police state is. Now I'm going to rattle off, I don't know, about a dozen things, Tom. You tell me if I'm wrong on any one of these.
All right, I'll give you a short answer.
All right, good. The NSA collects every American's phone records.
Well, it's not every, but it's a huge amount. So it's essentially yes.
Okay. 2, the prison program lets the NSA access private user data on leading online services.
Yes, although there are some, there's some qualifiers, but yes.
So that would include Microsoft, Yahoo, Google, Facebook, Paltalk, YouTube, Skype, AOL, Apple, you name it. Number 3, the NSA engages in offensive hacking operations, something called the tailored access operations.
Yeah, I was intimately familiar with that program in terms of what were real threats and on a foreign scale, but yes, it was greatly expanded after 9/11.
Right.
Yep.
So it was intended for high-value targets. Now the NSA has got a large library of exploits and allowing it to hack into a wide variety.
Because they can.
Because they can. All right, good. So, I mean, we're getting you on record. You're the expert. I'm not. You're the expert witness. Number 4, the NSA taps long-distance Internet connections.
Yes.
All right. Number 5, the NSA intercepted data flowing within Google and Yahoo data centers.
Yes, and in partnership with others. Five Eyes, people forget about the Five Eyes. Remember, it's an extraordinary array. It was set up after World War II, but yes.
Yes, and when you for our listeners, when you log into Gmail, you see a lock icon indicating that communications between your computer and Google server is protected by encryption. But guess what? Not encrypted. All right.
So just as a quick aside, these companies themselves are now having to push back in part because their model, their corporate model, is in fact under some threat from subscribers who are now increasingly demanding at least some modicum of protection.
And maybe along with H.R. 1466, that's where some hope lies.
Look at the letter that was actually signed by a number of the key companies in Silicon Valley and elsewhere pushing back, right?
There you go. That's it.
All right? I have some hope, okay? It's not like I wouldn't have accepted your invitation to come on your program if I didn't have hope. I have a lot more confidence in the citizen than many other fellow citizens do.
Right. Number 6, Tom, the NSA has spied on foreign leaders.
Yeah, but I'll smile because that's been done for decades.
Right. And that's
foreign intelligence. Look, there is a legitimate mission. If they can get away with spying on a foreign leader, fine. Except if it's Angela Merkel, do you really want to go there at the risk of a key ally? That's part of the challenge. But hey, foreign intelligence is foreign intelligence. I've just said we're all foreigners now.
Yeah. My sources tell me that at least 35 world leaders have been targeted by the NSA, including Brazilian.
It's probably actually more than that. Okay.
And including Brazilian
Well,
president.
it is more than that. I mean, I just say it's more than that, but yes, from what's been revealed, active programs, yes, but it's pretty much any foreign leader because they're foreign.
Well, right now, as I'm speaking with you, I'm looking at some documentary evidence that the NSA has filed on Brazilian President Dilma Rousseff and Mexican President.
Yeah, and by the way, see, this is the thing, goes on far beyond foreign intelligence. People forget that you can repurpose this. Look,
right.
If I have access to top-level strategy sessions and decisions before they're made or as they're made, guess what? I get extraordinary advantages when I negotiate. Economic, diplomatic, finance, right. Military, all of that. This is the sort of the game of the ages. I mean, information is the currency of power, okay?
Yep. The other documentary evidence that I'm looking at right now is the NSA spying on Mexican President Enrique Peña Nieto.
Some would say he deserves it. Okay, I'm just... All right?
All right. Number 7, the NSA spies on millions of ordinary people overseas.
Actually, yes, this is another thing. I've confronted people on this old Tom. Citizens, we have rights as U.S. citizens, but they don't. I'm saying, wait a minute, you treat a fellow human being differently just because they're non-American? Really? What about their laws? What about their rights? Okay, even in their own country, under their constitution or their form of government, where it exists.
That brings us to number 8, Tom. The NSA has tracked cell phone locations around the world, including collecting...
Actually, yes. There's
5 billion records per day.
Yeah, that's... yes. It's extraordinary. Look, it's the biggest surveillance program the world has ever seen.
All right, number 9, from just in the decade from 2001 to 2011, the NSA has collected vast amounts of data about Americans' internet usage.
Yeah, one of the things I actually blew the whistle on internally. It was one of the 4 pillars of mass surveillance, internet usage, data mining. It was one of those pillars.
Right. So that, again...
And not just NSA. When you say NSA, it got to be a little... It's not just NSA. There's a whole lot of this that's actually enabled in direct partnership with the FBI, okay?
Well, like I said, this is not about counterterrorism. This is about this is about a police state. And
social control is the
control.
Bottom line in any form of a police state, whether it's virtual or real.
And so this program of the NSA collecting data on what websites your user browser browsed, they say that that program operated for only 2 years under President Obama, but was shut down in 2011. Do you believe him?
Yes, I believe him under that part of that program, but there's other programs, quote unquote, other authorities that also give them access. Remember, you never have just one program.
Right. Exactly.
People forget this. Yes, they could. Yes, you could parse. Oh, yeah, under this program is shut down. There are other authorities.
Right. You build.
Well, have one when you can do 2 at twice the price.
Well, you build redundancy.
Yeah, that was the famous line in Contact. Yes.
Yes.
It's the first rule. Okay, it's like one of the first rules. Yeah.
All right, number 10. The NSA has undermined the security of encryption products over the last decade. The NSA.
This is an area I wish more people would focus on. I've said this for years. I confronted those investigators with this fact. The NSA was engaged in a huge program to compromise the fundamental integrity of the electronic infrastructure of the entire world wherever they could get away with it, knowing they could leverage American industry in secret to help them do so.
Why would tech companies agree to make exploitable products? I don't get what's in it for them.
The arrogance. We're good enough. It's not going to. We need it for national security, but we can. Yeah, we need it for national security. That was really the primacy here. They basically folded. And the other thing some people don't fully appreciate, many of these key companies, particularly not the new Silicon Valley, we're talking old telcos, old school providers, had already had special arrangements with the United States government going back decades.
Right. Number 11, the NSA uses tracking cookies to choose hacking targets.
Yes.
And this is something that Edward Snowden showed us. True?
Yes. Yes.
That's
part of the technology. Remember, the technology is benign, but you can use it for both ways. It's ironic the Internet was created literally to deal with a nuclear winter scenario in which all the communication nodes were blown out except for a few. Can you still get the message out? That was the basis. And you obviously weren't worried about security. You were just getting the message out, right?
Yeah. And now we have.
Now they want to take back Internet. I mean, that's what they said. We want to own it, control it.
And now there's an executive order where the Internet can be shut down in case of an emergency. It seems kind of backwards, doesn't it?
Remember, see, people, you just touched on something: emergency decrees, executive orders, national emergencies. This is the secret authorizing decree, fiat government of the executive branch. Most people don't fully appreciate it. It's outside of the Constitution. It's a corruption, a massive abuse of the Article 2 powers that are given to the president as commander-in-chief.
We only have two more here. Number 12, the NSA cracked a popular standard for encrypting cell phone communications, and I'm talking about the A5 standard.
Yeah, it's not the only one. There's others as well. This is a whole other area that most people, because it's so technical, that has not been yet fully explored. The whole set of not just exploits, but what was compromised in terms of actual algorithms.
Right. Well, you want to go into what encryption standards are?
Well, there's a whole host of them. I mean, it depends. When you say encryption, there's things like RSA. We know for a fact that NSA weakened the algorithms to make it easier for them to crack it.
Right.
In some cases, they did it. The random number generator. That's all. Matthew Green from Johns Hopkins, who I have extraordinary respect for. He doesn't buy a lot of the crap, right? He realizes what has happened here, and he continues to talk. He is also a teacher professor, but he also does research in this space. How far NSA went to compromise the essential security encryption standards of the world in terms of sort of Western technology and Western mathematics.
Yeah. I believe that IPv6 has been influenced in such a way as to remove the NAT from it. I think that's probably NSA as well.
Well, NAT is yes. Yes. I mean, part of the compromise here is when you're using the standards. Remember, the standards is one thing, then you implement them.
Right.
Part of this is in the implementation. This is where the ability to compromise or exploit takes place.
Yeah.
Look, I worked in this space in sort of the analog, and then it switched to digital in the 1980s. You're always looking to crack things, but a lot of cases where it was quote unquote at least uncrackable, you still had what was called the metadata or the envelope information. We never called it metadata back then. I actually call it meta content. It's a much better way to characterize this.
Right.
And
I want to remind our listeners, too, that A5 is old-school technology.
Actually, very old school.
Very old school.
But a lot of the old-school stuff is still in play.
Right.
That's like some of the hashing algorithms that have been severely compromised because they're just so widely spread. And in a lot of I used to be in software development engineering. At the code level, a lot of these libraries, because they're so embedded in so many different products and so much of the infrastructure, it's extremely challenging to update them.
Like MD5?
Yes.
And we're going to do a future show.
Well, even some of the hashs, like SHA-1, some of these are not, especially with a lot of the weaknesses are actually in the infrastructure. It's less. I mean, I agree with Snowden. Where encryption, where the math, like PGP, for example, when it's properly implemented, right? It's still awfully strong, especially like I use it at the 4096 bit key length. at that level, that's pretty secure, even 2048, right?
Right.
The problem is the infrastructure. I can't begin to tell you the horror stories of communications I've had and others have had where the infrastructure let us down.
Right.
And
Because of compromise. Not the actual math, but in the implementation infrastructure.
And Sid, you don't know this yet, but we're going to do a future show on some of these newer encryption standards. I have some internal documents that I just got my hands on that were forwarded to us. So we're going to do.
I don't trust NIST. I don't trust. I have to say this for the record. Any committee, whether it's national, international, IEEE. I used to be part of IEEE. I don't trust any of those. Okay, I don't.
I agree with you.
Because of wherever NSA was involved, I just don't.
All right.
There's a deliberate program. This was actually extraordinarily secret,
Yes.
where NSA would put themselves on these bodies and would compromise the integrity of these committees very surreptitiously to ensure that the standards that were created would still be at a lesser level in terms of implementation to allow it to make it easier for NSA to crack it or compromise it later.
Yep.
No. And we only learned about that in late 2013, I think.
Yeah, well, those things have been obvious to me for a while.
Well, they've been remember, and then on top of that, you have what's called lawful intercept technology, which is the contradiction in terms, where you build in the back doors, even when you have this. Remember, part of the advantage of PRISM, people don't realize this. It gave you the ability to look inside a person's account before they protected it, in terms of before they sent it, even in encrypted form. You're seeing it at the plain text level. And that was one of the advantages. You have essentially, effectively, the equivalent of a backdoor that the provider gives you, whether it's direct or indirect. And there's been some depending on who it is, what the level is, or someone that's basically on station that allows that type of access or root access to the database or the equivalent. Well, if I'm inside your account while you're typing, right, typing a message before you click the lock button or send it out encrypted in whatever form it is, right? Whether it's voice encrypted, right? With those protocols, whether it's PGP or if it's OTR or any of the others, I'm seeing it before it goes out. Guess what?
Yeah.
I don't even have to bother with trying to decrypt it because I actually see it.
You see it, right. All right, we got the last thing we want to get you on the record on, and then we'll ask you one question.
Sure.
And let you go. We're so grateful that you've given us so much time, Tom. And we will edit this. We will YouTube it, post it to Public Radio Exchange for the other NPR affiliates, and to Radio for All for the.
I'm just happy that you're practicing the First Amendment. What can I say?
Well, we're practicing it with you.
That's right.
And your colleagues, man, they've all been great. And we're going to seek funding, foundation funding, to bring you folks together. And
sure.
I was naive enough to think, I was not cynical enough to think that I couldn't develop a training program or a curriculum for young agents, but we'll talk about that some other time. So this is the last thing I wanted to get you
sure.
on the record on. So this is the 13th and last thing. There's an NSA program that allows the NSA to record every phone call and store it in a certain unspecified country and store it for 30 days. And they've stored these phone calls in the Bahamas, and I believe they've also stored them in Afghanistan. True?
Yes.
There you go.
Yes. Again, foreign intelligence. Okay. So remember, I'll be the first to tell you there are legitimate foreign intelligence needs, purposes, all of that. They're real threats. Okay? Having said that, do you have to actually take it all to know anything? And this is you going into this surveillance regime as opposed to a targeted intercept regime.
Right.
When you do that, all you do is create a massive haystack. You're just like the hoarder shows. You just keep stuffing more and more. That's why you have to keep building bigger and bigger facilities to store more and more. That means you effectively turn every straw into a needle, which means there are no needles. It becomes really hard to find a needle, and you assume, for the purposes of mass surveillance, that any straw might be a needle.
Right. And that all this is dumped in a place like the Bahamas for 30 days. That's incredible.
Right. That's in part, that dumping is partly a constraint on the technology. The extraordinary breakthroughs in storage over the last number of years. I can literally stick a terabyte of information on my thumbnail, okay? And that's just for starters. What we're talking about is the ability to essentially collect pretty much everything that's available electronically where I gain access or have access or when it's given to me, and then keep it. And this is kind of like the Minority Report. I then can go back in time to find crimes or find patterns or profile when it becomes necessary for other purposes,
right,
including political. Why did the Stasi, I have to say this because I became an expert in East Germany during the time I was there in the Air Force during the latter years of the Cold War. They kept extraordinary records on practically everybody in the country and beyond where they had their programs. Why? They were obsessed with knowing everything. Remember, to know everything. That was their motto, the Stasi, and they used it for other purposes. What are the other purposes? Social control, blackmail. We know something about you in secret that even you don't know. We can use that against you.
Sid, that's going to be the new title, the new name for our show, To Know Everything.
To know everything? Yeah.
But it's a pathological obsession.
Yeah, it is.
I mean, it's OCD-ish. It really is.
That's a good point.
It's a compulsive thing. Remember, we just need the data. Part of this I get was because of the failure of 9/11. In part, it accelerated the obsession. Oh my gosh, we missed stuff. We need more. And if we have a spectacular failure like the Boston Marathon bombers, guess what? That's just an excuse. We still need more because we didn't have enough, obviously. If we just get enough data, we'll be able to know it all. And somehow, if we get to know it all, we can know anything about anybody at any time, anywhere. Really?
But let's make sure that we let some things go by so we can get more funding, because we cannot solve the problem we were created to solve.
Well,
how about that for cynicism?
that was a little cynic on my part.
Say something about that. Doing the same thing equivalent over and over again and expecting a different result is a form of insanity.
Yes.
But this is big bucks. This is power. We got to get back to sort of the cult of national security. This has become a state religion. I'm really concerned about this, that somehow we can't question it. You question it, we're going to excommunicate you. There are very, really, really, really disturbing parallels here, okay? I mean, I had the opportunity to have to say this. I mean, because it's like, wow, the parallels. The documentary that played on HBO, Going Clear, on Scientology.
Uh-huh.
Oh my gosh!
I know,
right? Wow. Well, that's just this church with quote unquote 50,000 followers, right?
Right. And
the last thing I'm going to do is simply be an obedient follower who just genuflects at whatever national security says it needs. And if I question it, then I'm what? I'm a traitor. I'm not a patriot. I'm committing treason because I would dare question the great lords of national security. Really?
Yeah.
This is extraordinary power. But I realize people in these are not going to give this up willingly. You've seen what Brennan has said. Brennan. People don't fully. Brennan is sort of is Obama's shadow Dick Cheney. He really is in so many different ways. He's reorganizing CIA because he wants more control. It's that simple.
Right.
What do you think of some of his infrastructure changes and the shift now towards cyber?
Well, it's a new frontier. I mean, this is some of us, Bill Binney, myself, and others have said this. This is like the new frontier. We virtualize it all.
Yeah.
And it's sort of this maddening obsession with technology. Somehow the technology is going to solve it for us, but we have to own it. We need to control it. We need to be there. I mean, Hayden flagged this. Hayden himself, former director of NSA and the CIA,
right.
He early on flagged this. We just need to own the internet. He basically said we need to have this persistent presence no matter what is going on, this sensing system, right? Well, it's a sensing surveillance system, and I need the access to do that. And everybody wants in on this game. I mean, it's funny. Even I find it somewhat comical, having played in that system for so many years, seeing all the various intelligence agencies, departments vying for each other. They're vying with Congress. Me too, me too. I want my own program. I want my own surveillance. I want my own stuff. I mean, because it's this. I want to have it, right? If I don't have it, if I don't have my little hoard or big hoard, then it's not. I need it for my identity. I need it so I have value. It's pathological. I mean, it's just this obsession. Where's all this stuff coming from, right? Where is this really keeping us secure?
So,
I mean, what is security? See, you get into this identity, security. Who are we?
Right. So
what is their purpose? What's the purpose of national security? The Constitution says what it is in terms of history. We provide for the common defense. That's the open question that society, we the people, I believe, really must fundamentally answer is, what is the common defense? What is the general welfare? Those are the two principal responsibilities of the quote-unquote central government to provide. What does that mean? Well, history shows how that developed, how it evolved, for all of its faults, foibles, and all the challenges we had, including the Civil War, okay, where a president suspended habeas corpus unilaterally, although Congress, under the suspension clause, is the only part of the branch of government that can even do that, right? Well, now, when the executive branch gets to effectively suspend the Constitution, what does that mean for us? Well, I think we're paying an extraordinarily high price, and you asked the earlier question. Where's my real concern? I'm not actually worried about an Obama, right? For all the wrapping himself in his own robes of moral rectitude, okay? For all of that, I'm more worried about a president who comes along in 2020, 2024, okay, who makes no illusions at all about what form of government we are.
That's right.
That's the real concern. Okay? And I kind of pause, right?
And so did we.
Yeah.
All right? I kind of pause, right? And who's going to stop that president? Okay?
That's
a concern.
Did you ever see the handwritten note that Senator Jay Rockefeller wrote to Dick Cheney?
Yes.
Yeah. It's just, way back then, he was wondering the same question. I don't understand.
Yes, he was concerned enough in secret, as we now know. I mean, I'm well aware of that history. I mean, this is extraordinary history. A lot of it's been written, right? But the extraordinary, he was secretly briefed, gagged, couldn't have staffers, wasn't supposed to take notes. He was so concerned by what he heard.
Right.
He wrote himself, right? But he also reached out. It's like, I'm Cheney, right? What are you going to do about it? I mean, remember, Cheney milked and manipulated. He was really the master here because he knew how the system worked from within.
Right. He's kind of the
Cheney.
He was the architect.
Yes.
Yeah.
But there was a lot of people who were more than willing. But he effectively created. I'll say this: a secret government, a secret alien form of government within the existing form of government, and leverage that to the max.
Do you know John Kennedy warned about that in a speech at the Waldorf Astoria Hotel?
Yeah, I cited that speech recently in a forum in which I was at a prep school in Texas, San Antonio, recently, and I actually, during the debate, we had an ACLU staffer, we had EPIC, and we had one of the military Air Force a colonel heads up one of the cyber. The cyber units, cyber warfare units in San Antonio, and I actually brought that up as an example in terms of history. That particular speech, because it's extraordinary forewarning in part.
It's chilling
to the country.
It's chilling, and
yes.
And for our listeners, it was in April 1961, I think, that he made this speech. The Waldorf Astoria Hotel to the National Association of Newspaper Publishers, and he warns of a government within a government, a secret government, secret society. I mean, explicitly, And
yeah,
this,
it was quite explicit. And remember, he had just become president, and remember, just a few months earlier, you had the farewell speech from the outgoing president, Eisenhower.
Right.
Which didn't get a whole lot of press back then, right?
And this was at about the time, incidentally, that I won't go down that rabbit hole, but it was about the time that Israel was starting its nuclear weapons program, and there were elements in our government that wanted to assist in that, and I believe that's what Kennedy was referring to by the secret government, the government within a government. And he was very explicit. He didn't say it will exist. He says it exists, and I'm going to do everything in my power to fight it.
I believe he sensed, in terms of history, that if a secret government persists inside the existing one, something has to give. And what happens, it becomes a metastasizing cancer, and it just will overwhelm and take over the constitutional form of government. That's the direct threat from within to the republic. It's not the external threats. Remember, even you go back and listen to Madison's and the Washingtons and the others, they will actually warn the nation, even in the late 18th, very early 19th century, regarding what happens when you project foreign follies, right? That the existential threat that's out there, and then but meanwhile, guess what? You're compromising at home.
Right.
And now the means to do so, right? The means to do so from within the country becomes you have a much greater capacity.
So here's my final question, Tom, and I want you to offer some hope. It's a pretty bleak picture going back to Kennedy. How can such collective advocacy by you, Snowden, Binney, Wiebe, and all the others who have given so much for our country and who have suffered so much, how can your collective advocacy be used for the greatest impact, for the greatest good?
Well, you know what Margaret Mead said, never us the power of a few people, right? To paraphrase her, because that's been, the real changes. I mean, look, Martin Luther King talked about, the arc of history, right? Does bend toward justice. And I realize that it doesn't uniformly bend toward justice, that it takes jigs and jags. In some cases, it appears to be standing still. We're basically standing on that arc, and we're just jumping up and down on it and helping it bend, right? That's what we're doing. And we realize by doing it together, it bends easier than if it was just one of us or just randomly jumping up and down on it. And so part of our, I'd say, task is to inform the public and is to generate sort of at a more organic level that small percentage of people who are willing to affect the changes that are necessary if it matters. And I say if it matters because, remember, even in the American Revolutionary War, only about 3% of the population of the day actively supported the revolution. The vast majority of people simply just stood on the sidelines, right, waiting to see what would happen, the spectators of history. Others were actively supporting the crown against those who would dare revolt. Right. We believe, and I say it we, that for all of the things you can say are wrong with the Constitution, right, it's not a perfect form of government. Remember, it was an experiment in how to best govern ourselves. It was a grand experiment. I believe the experiment is still worth experimenting with, but we don't sit there and inject poison into it from within, because that's really becomes potentially the death knell. And so the antibody, I'll say it this way, though, to use that analogy, it's the white blood cells of the citizenry. The citizenry is the white blood cells we have to activate to go after what's going on inside the body politic.
Well, sir, you've been true to your oath to defend the Constitution. I want to thank you for being on the program. Is there anything that we didn't ask that you'd like to address?
Well, there's a whole lot of things we could talk about, but in terms of sort of what matters, I just think it's sort of what matters to people. I mean, I think it comes down to that fundamental question: what matters to people. Ultimately, it's up to us. I mean, it is we the people. We're the ones that have to live in the societies we live in, and it's ultimately our call. This is not easy stuff. Democracy, living in a republic, citizen, informing yourself, it's not easy stuff. There's lots of distractions. There's lots of other things. I got families and kids and jobs and mortgages to pay, on a local, everyday level, right? People have, daily priorities. But this is what's common. That's the commons. What's common to us, and our well-being. You can't just take care of yourself. You also have to consider what it means for others. And again, that's this concern. Freedom itself. What does freedom and liberty really mean? I mean, we have many dark chapters that we can point to. I just don't want to live that again. I mean, I really don't. I think I'll leave your audience with this. When I was sentenced, it was a pro forma sentence. It was a plea agreement. Government drops all the felony charges. I end up accepting the sentence. The sentence was handed down: 1 year probation and 240 hours of community service. What did I end up doing? I ended up interviewing veterans for the Veterans History Project, Library of Congress. Go out to the Veterans History Project website, search on the contributor, my name, as a submitter, and you'll see about 3.5 dozen interviews. Extraordinary interviews. I would ask your listeners to simply take the time, just 1 or 2 of those interviews. But if you have the opportunity, maybe take several hours over several days or weeks or months and actually listen. Listen to the veterans, share what matters to them, because they were the ones that came back. They're the ones that didn't end up in Flanders Fields. They're not the ones that are lying in unmarked graves. They're not the ones that spilled blood. Okay? They came back, and they have something to say to us in terms of the sacrifices they made and those who died with respect to liberty and freedom. If that matters, then you will take what you hear from those veterans and do whatever you need to do in terms of your daily activities. You will make that difference in your life, but at least inform yourself as to what those who have come before us and have served our country say about the future of our country. And that's the final question. I think I'll just leave you with this in your audience. The fundamental question we must ask ourselves and answer, because if you don't answer it, then it's just an empty question. What future do we want to keep? What future do we want to keep? Benjamin Franklin, we have history reportedly saying, when he came out of that Constitutional Convention held in secret, woman reporter apparently came up to him and said, "Hey, what did you guys create in there?" And he said, "A republic," his purported answer, "a republic if you can keep it." What do you want to keep?
You have 5 sons, don't you, Tom?
Yes.
Well, you're giving this to them.
Yeah, that's a very poignant way of putting it on a very personal level. Yes, I bequeath that to them. Yes. I think that's
your greatest legacy in the Drake family. Sir, I want to thank you so much for being on the show. Very poignant, especially so during a Holy Week leading up to Easter. I want to thank you so much, Tom. We'll edit this. We'll get it to you. We'll get it posted. God bless you, sir. God bless you.
Well, that's why I've dedicated the rest of my life to defending life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. So,
thank you, Tom.
That's where I'm standing.
Thank you, Tom. God bless you, sir.
You're welcome. Take care.
Thank you.
And instead of talking, we're going to do something about it.